Welcome to Craft Politics. I'm Joseph Lavoie,
And I'm Andrew Percy.
and we are glad to be back again this week. We have later in the show an interview with former Cabinet Minister James Moore. A really interesting conversation.
Joseph, just to be clear, do you mean there are two former MPs? Two former ministers? I don't really know, but I used to be an MP. I don't talk about it, but just thought, so there'll be two former MPs and former ministers.
Former MPs.
And former ministers, just checking, right?
Okay. Right.
Anyway, carry on. You were saying.
Oh boy, wasn't I lucky, eh? To have two of them to speak to.
Yeah, who are you? What do you bring to this, apart from the editing skills?
What are you drinking this week? What do you have on top there?
Well, I've actually got. Would have had my beer of the week. I had a really sad week end to last week. Actually, my good friend who I've known since I was 20, when I first worked here in Vancouver, sadly passed away. And Hugh was Welsh. He was born in Wales. His parents emigrated here. Was a really good friend, and they used to live around Mount Pleasant, and we always used to go to Main Street Brewing. So his neighbours Matt and Sasha were good friends with them. I'm good friends with them still. So on Saturday we went and had a few drinks at Main Street, and weirdly we walked in there, and the beer that I've never seen them produce before was the Welsh Red Ale. And I hate red ales. And I always used to joke with Hugh because he would always drink the Saison number 7 from there, and I was only the IPAs. So we got in and we had this, and we were like, we know what you're doing, Hugh, with this. Anyway, so we had this. We thought that was strange. Anyway, then I went and checked the name was a Welsh name of the beer. And when I got home, I Googled it. And this is so bizarre. The name of the beer, the Welsh word, actually means a grief or loss associated with the departed, especially in a Welsh context. It was a Welsh language word. So that was just really, really quite bizarre. And, you often don't like to talk about these things, but it just, we're all very sad about it. It's all absolutely awful what's happened. But at the same time, that would have been my beer of the week because, just as Hugh used to often make me drink the Saison number 7s, because that's all he ever had when I would get off a plane and they'd be like, he'd throw me the Saison number 7. They'd be like, oh, I hate this beer. It tastes like perfume. Of course, we turn up and he makes me drink a Welsh Red Ale. We had to buy it. We had no other choice.
Right.
So we drank it. We laughed and we cried a bit, those of us who were out. And it was just a really nice way to remember Hugh. But the actual beer I'm drinking this week is actually from Nickelbrook Winter Wizard, and it's from Ontario.
Oh, wow.
So I thought, we keep hearing about how we need to pull down provincial barriers. So I thought, I'm like, everyone else is a hypocrite and never does anything about it. So I was prepared to pay the additional cost of the beer from Ontario. So this is it's a magical IPA Winter Wizard from Nickelbrook.
Ooh, I've never had that one, so I'm eager to get your tasting notes on it.
Yeah.
I'm drinking for the second week in a row something from Hoyne Brewing. That's just because I couldn't quite get out and get something from a different brewery in time for the show.
Were you not on one of your runs? Did you not run past?
Actually, funny enough, last couple of weeks we've been recording before I've been doing my runs, and I've been going for runs like after having a beer, and it's a very weird thing to be doing. But so I'll be doing the same thing again today. But I'm drinking Dark Matter, which is, as the name suggests, a very dark beer. But seems like we should pour one of these and do a little toast to Hugh, shouldn't we?
Yeah.
Now, do you actually say nice things in a toast as British people, or you tell them to go fuck off?
Well, you can. There's a Yorkshire toast you can say, which is, "Oft times there's made me pawn my clothes, oft time there's turned me mates to foes, but now there's here afore my nose, up the pops and down the goes." And the other, what's that other Yorkshire toast, which is, "Hear all." Was it hear all, see all, drink all, something, eat all, something, pain out. And if there ever does out for now, do it for. I'll find it out for next week. But anyway, cheers to you.
Cheers to you.
And the funny thing is with Hugh, as I was like, he's not into politics. We probably had different politics. We would, if we hadn't met when we were like 20, and there was a group of us working here in Vancouver, and I worked at Eaton's. I had my Eaton's shirt. If we'd not met when we were 20, we probably would never have ended up as friends. And those are some of the best friendships you have, right? Are the people you actually have very little in common with, but because you put together at one time, especially when you're young, you stay friends. Whereas when you get later, my newer friends are people like you who are just in politics and they're just not as nice. I mean, sorry.
Or less interesting.
But anyway, yeah. So it's good to drink another one to Hugh anyway. So.
There we go. Very good. Well, with that, we have, we're going to get to our interview soon, but we thought there could be a couple of things we can just quickly touch on.
Well, we're going to cover the election right in the interview, but it's worth saying that this, for those who are listening who aren't in Canada, which is quite a lot of our listeners, is this amazing turnaround of the Liberals has continued. They're up again on the CBC, like the BBC poll tracker has them up again. So, averaging in the 40s now. And this is just considering, as we keep saying every week, 20 points. They were at 20%. Now they're at the mid 40s in lots of polls. Is an incredible turnaround. So that's continuing. So that's the election.
An incredible turnaround. And it's come, of course, as Mark Carney has had to, at moments, take brief pauses from the campaign to do the job of prime minister. So there was a call with the White House with Donald Trump last week. It was an interesting, I haven't had a chance to talk about this yet, but I was trying to make sense of that development. So this phone call happens. And of course, no one knows what to expect because you're dealing with Trump. So is Trump going to take a big shit on Canada? Is he going to call Carney the governor of the 51st state? And by all accounts, it was a very good call. The comms that came out of it, Trump was very positive, and he said he was very much looking forward to working with the next government.
Called him prime minister.
Called him prime minister. Wasn't insulting. On the one hand, that's a very optimistic development. I'm like, okay, great. Like, sigh of relief. Finally, we're getting like a little bit of respect from the president. At the same time, though, is it a sign that Trump sees us or sees Carney as weak? And the reason I say that is because Trump has no interest in a strong Canada. He has every interest in Canada getting weakened. So does he see Carney? And I'm really not trying to be partisan about this, but does he see Carney as someone he can more easily get his way with? And does he see Pierre Poilievre as this, strong-willed populist conservative figure? And so, maybe he has a better chance of pulling one over on Carney. I don't know.
I don't know what's in President Trump's head, and I don't want to on many things. But you can argue it two ways, right? One, he either sees Carney as a serious figure who he doesn't think he can push around, and he's the sort of person he would be very comfortable having mixed within his whole of his New York real estate life, right?
Right.
Very wealthy people in banking. Maybe it's that, or maybe it's, as you've said, he sees him as this guy's going to be a pushover. He's a novice to politics. The other guy's probably got more depth on policy and politics, and and if he comes to power, we'll have a base that's more likely to support some things that might be difficult for him. So I don't know. So you can argue it both ways, but who knows? But yeah, it's a good point to raise.
And in the face of that, there seems to be a little bit of, as tends to be the case, I always say, in Canada, conservatives we're our own worst enemies. We're so good at tearing ourselves down. And there's a little bit of that happening, right? So because the poll numbers continue to demonstrate liberal momentum, and they haven't yet, it appears, the Liberals have not yet hit their plateau in their support. There are other commentators, former staffers who are coming out and demanding that the campaign and that the Pierre Poilievre campaign undertake a much more aggressive pivot, that the campaign focus on the ballot question, which is Trump. And so there's a lot of process stories around whether Pierre Poilievre's campaign team is executing the correct strategy.
These irritating armchair commentators who are coming out and telling people how they should run the campaign. Something we would never do.
We would never do.
Podcast and have not done at any point, right?
Well, hopefully our listeners will remember that you and I were a little bit sheepish on this 2 weeks ago when we were like, we don't want to be those people who shit on the war room, because it is not easy to be doing that work. And so I think we've mostly held back, but others haven't. And so,
and some are just, some of the people who've come out and said things are just, kind of settling old scores, right?
Yeah, which is always something to keep in mind. However, I think I'm still of the view, or my view has evolved on this a little bit, which is I don't know that the Conservative campaign is getting enough credit for the way it's evolving. And maybe it's a little bit more like navigating like a big tanker ship, right? You do make some adjustments, but you're not going to see the immediate effects of it. And I still think it's important for the Conservatives to focus on some of the ultimate underlying feelings for why people originally wanted to change, and if they can find a way to link that to a future state 4 years from now. What do you want your life to be like in 4 years from now? I think the campaign is starting to find the right balance between having something to say on the Trump stuff while also driving contrast and putting ideas in the window, and getting more driving more contrast. Some of the stuff that Pierre Poilievre is coming out with is starting to drive a clear
Well,
contrast between him and Carney.
yeah, but it is April, and the Trump stuff all hit in January, so maybe this should have all happened already.
Right,
But anyway,
right.
that's the Canadian. What else? What else have we got?
Well, you said you
Yeah,
had two stories that you thought were interesting that we
yeah,
should
just
things
to
to
discuss,
watch.
just to mention briefly. Actually, I'll just get them up here. I thought one was we've talked a bit about on some of the crazier Trump stuff where you think like traditional conservatives might be a bit offended, and why are we not seeing voices that are saying, "Hang on, you can't talk about you can't do what you're doing with Putin and shit on your allies and your friends." And we've wondered why there hasn't been any pushback and whether there's been any comeback electorally or politically. Well, there's this congressional by-election, special election taking place in Florida to replace, I think it's Waltz's seat, and it's quite interesting because it's seen as a traditionally safe Republican seat, but it's looking like it's running down to a very, very close race. And this is in Florida. I think it's in the middle of Florida or eastern Florida. I can't remember whereabouts it is exactly. But the fact that this, what should be a safe Republican congressional district seems to be turning into quite a close race, I thought was interesting to watch where that ends up. Whether this is a part of a pushback from some of his base, which is not happy about, because ultimately this tariff stuff is going to, there's been reports in US media now. Obviously the stock markets have been a bit mixed since all that, but there's been plenty of reports now in US media about how these tariffs are going to up prices on things like cars and food and all sorts of products coming in. And Trump's response has been a bit, I don't care. Well, maybe that's a hint that some of the base is now starting to react to that. So that was one just to watch. The second one I thought was interesting was a UK context was, two UK things actually was Keir Starmer and the Labour government there have been trying their hardest to be the kind of Trump whisperer, to build a relationship, all with I think the two aims of that have been to kind of be Europe and the West's Trump whisperer on foreign policy issues, but also on the UK economy and on tariffs, trying to make the case to Trump that, hey, we're actually kind of in sort of balanced relationship we have with the US. It's the UK's biggest single trading partner. It's there's not this big deficit. It's quite balanced, so don't hit us with tariffs. Looks like that's completely failed, as probably many people thought it would. So there's that element that the Starmer whispering doesn't seem to have paid off, and that will make a lot of people feel very smug, I suppose. The second one was there's been this argument going on. There've been a lot about the whole end of wokery in the US, and we discussed it previously about will this carry over to other countries. Well, in the UK, there's been this strange argument going on about the Sentencing Council, which issues guidance to judges and magistrates in their sentencing. The Sentencing Council had come up with some new guidance which said that magistrates and judges must, before, if someone's found guilty and they're from an ethnic minority, then there should be a report, a sentencing report, a pre-sentencing report, which would have been binding on judges. The argument for this is that it helps deal with any imbalances in how different minority ethnic groups are dealt with. However, what I thought was interesting about this, whatever the rights or wrongs of that, and I would generally be against that, it's created this whole two-tier sentencing argument. And the Conservative shadow spokesman Robert Jenrick has been very strong on this, but the Lord Chancellor, who's the Justice Secretary in the government, the Labour Justice Secretary, has come out against it and has even threatened the Sentencing Council that she'll introduce emergency legislation to prevent this. Now, this is quite interesting coming from a Labour government to an independent body. And, on a issue of what can be seen as wokery and this two-tier stuff, because Keir Starmer's nickname has on parts of the right being two-tier Kia. So I thought this was just a very robust response from a Labour government on something I, in the past, would have thought they would have ran away from on the basis of we don't interfere, it's independent judicial processes. But they're obviously feeling the heat from the rise of reform, from some of this anti-woke movement, if that's what it is. And then I was also reflecting that as if we'd been in government, the last government I was, a member of or an MP for.
Were you an MP?
Well, I don't like to talk about it, Joseph, but yes, I was. I was thinking, I'm not sure we would have actually been as robust on this as this new Labour government has been. Because in some respects, on issues like that, it's easier for people who are on the left to be robust on them than people on the right, because we just get accused of racism or of not dealing with kind of racial bias in the sentencing and prison population, whereas they have the kind of space to do it. But I thought it was interesting just that they have come out so strongly and to threaten them with emergency, which has then put the Sentencing Council into reverse, who a couple of days ago were saying it's coming in anyway, and have now said, well, because we've been threatened with emergency legislation, we're going to suspend the guidance. But it's evidence of, that this whole anti-woke, whatever it is, progressives, DEI stuff, whatever you want to call it, isn't just an American issue. It's happening in UK politics, and no doubt because Labour are feeling the pressure from the Reform Party on a lot of
interesting.
So anyway, I just thought it was
because the narrative so far, that as I've understood it, is that Reform's gains have been mostly threatening and hurting UK Conservatives. So I find it interesting that Labour is also feeling threatened by Reform gains.
Because we have local elections, as we discussed last week, but those local elections are generally in county council areas. So UK local government is a mishmash. There are different types of arrangements. So in lots of the shires, the big rural counties, they have a county and then they have a district council structure, and their elections are on a similar cycle, or all on the same cycle, I think. And it's the counties that are out, and those tend to be generally the counties that are out, and those generally are very good for the Conservatives. So this is really, it's Conservative voting counties that are going out to local elections. It's not big cities. I don't think it's Leeds. It's not Manchester. It's not Newcastle. It's not Hull. It's none of these cities, not London. It's the counties. So, of course, yes, it will be Tory losses primarily. But there are Labour councils out as well, a few of them. And it looks like, so County Durham, for example, I think, and Doncaster. It looks like, Reform could eat Labour alive there as well. So they are very much, Reform's attraction is coming, they are attractive to both Conservatives and Labour voters in traditional Labour voting areas. It's just this election is fewer of the Labour seats are up. But there's an important parliamentary by-election because a Labour MP recently punched a constituent several times in the face and attacked him. I mean, it's really brutal attack.
To be clear for our listeners, this is not some joke. This is like actually occurred.
True, yeah. And he attacked a constituent at like 2 a.m, who I think was being quite rude to him. I can't remember the full thing, but he properly went for him. And there was video footage of it. So he resigned. So there's this by-election in a very, very safe Labour seat that Reform, according to some of the local polling or whatever, could be running Labour very close or even possibly win. So I think this is a bit of a reaction to that as well. So yeah, Reform are a threat to Labour as much as they are to the Conservatives, and some may even argue more.
Wow, interesting.
Anyway, I just thought
a
couple of interesting UK developments there. So anyway, beer, how's your beer?
Yeah, beer is it's great. As I said last week, Hoyne is just I think a world-class brewery, and this is everything you want it to be. So it's nice and dark. It's called dark matter for a reason. Just that super deep brown color. Nice head.
It is a stout though.
Yes, it is a stout.
Not a porter, because stouts and porters are the same, right? Just like cold IPAs and IPLs, yeah?
Yes.
This is a very in-beer joke here that wines...
on one of our shows, we'll do a breakdown the differences between porters and stouts, and it might be a bit of a struggle because even I struggle sometimes to explain the difference. But
what about IPLs and cold IPAs? Because they are just the same, so that won't be a very long episode, will it?
Well, before we bore our listeners with the nuances of those differences, I'll just say on my tasting notes, deep malt, lots of cooked caramel, and lovely roasted coffee notes all sort of popping out in this one for me. What are the tasting notes on that?
It's actually very nice. It's very stone fruity. It doesn't actually say what hops are in it. I was trying to look. I can't see any, but I get absolutely, the traditional kind of stone fruit, mango, a bit of pineapple, tangerine as well on the nose. So I'm gonna guess. I'm assuming it's probably like mosaic hops, very stone fruity, isn't it?
It can be.
It's actually really nice. It actually didn't rate as highly on Untapped as I would normally go for, but actually I really like it.
Yeah. They make good beers. It's a good brewery.
Yeah, I've had a couple before, but it's really thick and it's just that. But it is very definitely that like stone fruit with just a little sweet tangerine a bit. But yeah, I get a lot of mango and a bit of pineapple.
We'll finish drinking these and cut to the interview. So we got James Moore, and I think next week we're going to do an exploration around foreign interference challenges in this election.
I have to be quiet in that one then.
Um,
Any commentary I offer could be deemed foreign interference.
foreign
right?
interference.
I'm a lawful resident of this country, right? I have rights.
So we'll do that next week, and we'll take it from there. Thanks for listening, guys. All right, we are so excited to have James Moore on the show. James served in Parliament between 2000 and 2015, representing Port Moody, Coquitlam, Port Coquitlam, and then Port Moody, Westwood, Port Coquitlam, and also served in Cabinet, Minister of Canadian Heritage, Official Languages, and then Minister of Industry. And Andrew, I don't know if you knew this, I had to remind myself of this little tidbit, but when James was elected MP, he became the youngest member of Parliament in BC's history when he won his seat in 2000. Trivia question, how old do you think he was?
Well, he's very kindly given up his time, so I'm going to say 24.
Oh!
So
you did not know that, did you?
No, I didn't, but did I get it right?
Yeah, you did.
There you go.
I'm just too brilliant. So it's like, I don't know. We should just end there now. That's the end of the interview.
Well, it's funny you say that. When I was 24 when I was elected in the year 2000, and the previous youngest member of Parliament from BC was a guy named Sven Robinson, who was a longtime,
NDP,
New Democrat member of Parliament. Yeah, and he and I became good friends. And I saw him in the airport. He said, "You're the youngest now. You replaced me." And I said, "Oh, that's good. Now I can just quit because." And I said, for a lot of conservatives, just getting Sven Robinson off of any history book is probably a good accomplishment. I can probably stop there. So he laughed. He got the good nature of it. But yeah, so I was young. So there you are.
I did see though. Is it true that you used high school yearbooks to identify potential supporters in that first campaign?
You've done your homework. I did. It's funny. I sat down. So I was up in Prince George. I was a staffer at Parliament Hill up to the age of 21. Then 21 to 24, I finished my undergraduate degree at the University of Northern British Columbia up in Prince George. And when I was thinking about running, anyhow, in 1998, we lost the by-election. My riding went Reform Party 93, Reform Party 97. We lost it in a by-election in 98. So I figured that in 2000, it should swing back to the norm of a general election of going back to the Reform Party at the time. So, and that was correct. So the key was to win the nomination. So when I was up in Prince George, I looked at a map of the riding and I got my high school yearbook out, my junior high yearbook out, and all of my rosters from all the hockey teams that I played on. And then I had a phone book out and I sort of plotting people and finding out whether or not they lived in the riding. And if they lived in the riding, I would phone them and say, even if they were away at university, I said, "Does your driver's license still say that you live at 123 Main Street?" And they would say, "Yeah." Great. So you live in the riding. So they might have been a student at Queen's or something, but they live in the riding. And so I'd signed them up over the internet and yada, yada. And I won the nomination and went on to 15 years.
Well, that's how you do politics, isn't it?
We're going to have to explain to British listeners sometimes this weird nomination process where candidates spend more time trying to get the nomination than they spend before the election actually campaigning as the candidate in that seat, which completely blows my mind. But we'll do a whole podcast on that and my very strong views on it, having watched it in action here now.
It's so true, though. I last year helped a candidate win the nomination, and the harder campaign was the nomination. We knew that once this candidate won a nomination, it was a very safe conservative seat. Then the hard work was over. So yeah, it's an interesting dilemma, isn't it?
Well, it's hard because in a general election, you have a month plus of constant media coverage and obsession about what's going on, the issues, the leaders, et cetera. And so the public feels like they're part of something, a big conversation and a big decision. And that's motivation enough to get them out to vote. Within a party, when you sign people up, it's fratricide because everybody kind of agrees on all the stuff. And it's a personality contest about who the best spokesperson is. and who has the best clique of friends that they can draw out to a high school gymnasium on a Saturday morning. And so it gets to be very personal in terms of your commitment to your friend and which of us is the better spokesperson for the party in our district. And that's a very personal judgment as opposed to a macro value judgment about society. And so it hurts. It hurts when you lose, and when you win, it's because you've got the better group of friends.
Well,
And that's a very personal thing to carry with you.
see, I would never want to see that in the UK because I'm just not likable and I don't have enough friends who would turn up and do that. So I would never would not work there. But
Yeah.
I'd still find it like interesting that it takes so much effort to win the nomination, and then the time you're the actual candidate, where you're trying to appeal to the broader electorate, is so short because you've spent so much time doing this like long. I mean, some of them this time were like a year or more waiting for the nominations to be called. Right? It's kind
But
of
this is the good bridge to the macro conversation we're about to have about the election campaign. The reason why, Andrew, is in the Canadian system is that we have a parliamentary system, but we have presidential style politics. So,
totally.
like a lot of things in Canada, where we're a hybrid from the UK, but we're influenced by American culture, our political system is very much who do you like, Carney or Poilievre? Just like America, it's Trump or Biden or what have you. So we have a parliamentary system, presidential style politics. So therefore, when 3 out of 4 ridings basically have voted the same way for 9 out of 10 of the last elections, to win the nomination is to guarantee a very high probability of outcome of not just this election, but another election, which means a pension, which means another election, which means a career, which means another election, which means a legacy. And so you start stacking these sort of deliverables on top of it, that when you seek a nomination, it has a very, very long tail in terms of accrued benefit and an opportunity to do something meaningful that you can't just do in one parliament.
I I didn't even know we got a pension for being an MP. Is that a thing? I'm just like, so,
It's a thing.
oh
It's
well,
a
there
thing.
we are. I shall have to go check into that.
Yeah.
Time for you to start your career here, Andrew.
So before Joseph gets us kicked off on where we're at in the election, just in terms of the current ridings and which of the existing ridings is the one that most reflects your previous one? Is it Coquitlam Port Coquitlam or the Port Moody Coquitlam riding?
Coquitlam, Port Coquitlam, that footprint. So originally, it's funny. It says a lot about. So for those who don't know, that's basically the Lower Mainland of Vancouver, the northeast sector of the Lower Mainland of Vancouver. So it's considered a coastal riding. But when I was first elected in 2000, my riding, all of that footprint is now 2.5 ridings in the current world
Right.
because of urban sprawl,
Oh, wow.
densification, migration from the rest of the country, immigration from the Asia Pacific. And so it's actually the perfect swing riding. The Reform Party won it, as I said, 93, 97, 2000. I won it for 5 terms, and it went Liberal in 2015 when Justin Trudeau won, and now it's considered a swing riding. So it's actually the perfect Lower Mainland swing riding, upper middle class riding, more than 50% visible minority. The largest ethnic minority communities and cohorts would be Chinese, Korean, and Persian communities, with whom there's a very mixed diaspora in terms of their political engagement and sort of sophistication. And so it's a perfect swing riding. The Conservatives are running a former provincial cabinet minister, Ian Black.
Yeah.
The Liberals have an incumbent MP who's been there now 3 terms. And it's a perfect saw-off. And it's a two-party race in that district, NDP, or Liberal and Conservative, with the NDP falling off. And basically, it's, a lot of people say this about a lot of ridings, but if Conservatives win that riding, they're going to be having a very good night. If they lose it, then they will not win government.
Hmm.
Interesting.
Okay, we'll have to keep an eye on that one. Well,
Yeah.
why don't we get into the federal election campaign? We're now heading in. Well, we're well into the second week. Starting to me, it seems like we're starting to see a bit of a clear policy contrast between the two frontrunners, which is how I still see this campaign. I see it as a race between Carney and Poilievre. What's your take heading into the second week, particularly as we record this on the eve of Trump's sort of Liberation Day, when we're expecting a whole package of fresh tariffs to hit us and a whole bunch of others?
Yeah, it's a two-horse race. I mean, it's the poll story is typified by and there's a consensus view about this. The NDP falling off a cliff without actually being pushed, which is rare. They just sort of walked backwards and found
Backward.
themselves in free fall, right? And so those New Democrat votes have been freed up, and the Liberals have hoovered them all up. If you look at the The lowest that I've seen for Pierre Poilievre is 36, and I've seen a peak of just over 40. Well, 36 to 40 as a base for a conservative vote in a campaign that hasn't started off with like super momentum is a fantastic foundation, and any national conservative would be extraordinarily happy to have that as a base level of support. But the problem is that Mark Carney, because the NDP have fallen so hard so fast, is that and without the Liberals having to make overt overtures to the hard left in order to accrue that vote, it allows Mark Carney not to have to tilt to the left in such a way that it allows him to be more appealing to the center. And so, in a lot of ways, I think Mark Carney is actually looking a lot like Stephen Harper. If you look at his platform, like he hasn't been rhetorically excessive on abortion or guns or official languages or culture or some of the hot button stuff that often conservatives have a hard time stick handling. And so he's allowed to talk explicitly about economic renewal and economic reintegration of Canada, not coming out against the conservative call for example, an energy corridor to the coastlines and stuff like that. So he's given himself a lot of space because of the collapse of the NDP, and that's good. And he obviously has, Mark Carney has a very distinct and contrasting style from Justin Trudeau, from Donald Trump, from Pierre Poilievre,
Yeah.
so I think on a very superficial basis, it's allowed him to attract an open-minded audience that was closed before under Justin Trudeau.
Yeah. Although it's funny, you mentioned on the stat, I listened to another broadcast the other couple of weeks ago, which said that the Conservatives have never formed in modern history to form government, never failed to form government if they've got 36, 37%. And this would be, looking at the polling, the first time they would hit that figure and not form government. And the interesting thing about that coalition, which is getting to the Liberals to 45, 46, is, and I don't fully understand it myself, is how has Mark Carney, who people label as anything from centre to red Tory to whatever, managed to get people from the harder left to vote Liberal if the polls are true, when Trudeau, who was definitely very much seen as on the left of the in Liberal Party terms anyway, failed to get those people. So how is Mark Carney able to do that when Trudeau couldn't, with these quite hard left quite these people on who are falling into the Liberals now have very strong views on climate, workers' rights, all those kind of issues.
So two things are true. Well, the first thing you said though about the polls is that conservatives never lose if we're north of 35 or 40 or thereabouts. True. However, historically, that would require for the New Democrats to split the vote, which goes back to what I just said a second ago, right? So we are in a two-party race, and that's a problem for conservatives. Number one. Two is the regional numbers are not efficient for conservatives, right? When we're at 65% of the vote in Alberta and Saskatchewan and rural British Columbia, you get the point, right? That doesn't yield you more seats; it just yields you a bigger victory party. Mark Carney does well in all that because look, we've had, for the sweep of Canadian history, 1 in 3 parliaments is a minority parliament, and we've had 2 minority parliaments in a row. And I think a lot of like, Canadians are not always sophisticated about the nuances of politics or policy, but Canadians take serious as a heart attack their obligation to vote and the choice that's in front of them. And the choice that's in front of them, I think they know. There's 2 governing parties through all of Canadian history, the red team or the blue team. They know what Pierre Poilievre is. They don't know what Mark Carney is, but they think they know, and they're open to hearing more about it, but they really know what Pierre Poilievre is. They've watched him for a long time. And so Pierre's maneuver to gain more votes is going to be a lot harder. His final 5% is going to be a lot harder. It's sort of like losing weight, the last 5 pounds, right? Like the last 5 yards that the conservatives have to get is going to be a lot harder than the last 5 yards for liberals. And to the frustration of New Democrats historically in the country, they've always made a pitch in the last week, 10 days of the campaign, right? Which is, you really don't want Mulroney, you really don't want Scheer, you really don't want O'Toole, you really don't want Harper, so don't split the vote and come home to the Liberals. And that has had some purchase over the years. And sometimes it's not worked, but this time they can say, no, let's cut the noise here. There's an existential threat to Canada's sovereignty, our economic security, a president that is negligent with the rule of law, who lies about Canada, who betrays his own agreement, who is threatening not tens, hundreds of thousands of Canadian jobs, and on whom we cannot rely for our basic security under a NATO agreement that America has stood by since the Second World War. This is a big election. So who do you trust? when the election is over and 2, 3, 4 weeks after the campaign, somebody is going to be sitting in that chair that Volodymyr Zelensky was sat in. And across from that person is going to be Donald Trump and JD Vance and the alt-right media barking, why are you wearing a suit over his shoulder? Who do you trust in that chair? Who is sturdy and has the stamina and the dignity and the strength to be that person? It's a big question. And
Yeah.
Canadians take it really seriously, and they know that the NDP are not the question. So they're looking really hard at Carney and Poilievre.
They are so much not the solution to that even one of their former leaders, Tom Mulcair, has been out saying, "Come on, guys, this is a two-horse race. If you're not a serious contender to form government, let the big boys have a go at it." And that to me is striking that we're seeing that kind of commentary.
Well, and regionally, the proxy war of who you draw as your candidate, like Stephen Harper's, Joseph very well. Like Stephen Harper, he ran and lost in '04. We gained seats, but we didn't form government. Paul Martin got his last minority. Then between '04 and '06, we went out, we got John Baird and Jim Flaherty and Tony Clement and a few others. And certainly in the province of Ontario, people went, oh, okay. So you are mainstream. You're not the Reform Party with some rounded edges, some edges rounded off. You actually are serious people with serious people who have led serious governments. Okay, now I'm prepared to listen to what you got. And Mark Carney, in a different way, while he's got some of the baggage of the Trudeau era, sure, he's also gone out and he's gotten, for example, here in British Columbia, Andrew Weaver, who's the former leader of the British Columbia Green Party. It looks like he's going to run for Mark Carney. He's got Gregor Robertson, the former mayor of Vancouver, who's a New Democrat, lifelong New Democrat, who's going to be with Mark Carney. Now, it creates a different problem that I'll talk about in a second. But I think to the intended audience of the NDP Liberal switch voters, they kind of go, Mark Carney is a banker, and he looks like a banker, and he looks like a red Tory, and Jim Flaherty said good things about him. Oh, but Andrew Weaver and Gregor Robertson trust him? Okay, that's good enough. And you get that validation. Whereas Pierre and the Conservative Party, they haven't done what Stephen Harper did, which is to get that second and third party validators of credible people who have been in big offices to say, you may not know him, I know him. You may not trust him, I trust him. So if it's worth anything, I'm with him, and I think you should be too. And that's something where we've fallen short.
And how important do you think the history of Pierre Poilievre and some of the Conservative caucus of embracing things like the trucker convoy, stuff on vaccine mandates, even some positive stuff about the Trump agenda? How much do you think that's really filtered through to Canadian minds and is playing in and is what is part of the explanation of what we're seeing in the polls?
I think it's there and it's fair. And I think the Liberals pressed hard on it, right? With those early ads, I think pre-writ ads. I don't know if they were actually writ ads, where they did the back and forth of Trump rhetoric and Pierre rhetoric and all that. I think it matters, and I think it's a wound, but it's a bargain in politics, right? If you take a stand, you know that you're going to, you're going to offend or push people away on the other side, and there is, I think, some problem to it when you say fake media and liberal media, and you talk about Canada first. It's like Donald Trump says, fake media, liberal media, America first, and we go around and we say fake media, liberal media, Canada first. Canadians go,
Yeah.
wait a minute. I think I heard the same thing. And
Right.
you can say, well, no, I'm not MAGA. Well, I don't know. You're not, I guess, but it's a problem. And so I think in a lot of ways, the conservative movement has been a little bit trapped by the Trump movement since 2016. This is not a contemporary thing, and I think we've struggled. And Joseph's been around this movement a lot. I know, Andrew, you've been really engaged and literate about the broad nature of the Canadian conservative movement. Donald Trump has been a struggle about how to deal with it. I mean, for me, I had clarity about who I've been a never Trump conservative since day one, proudly so. Exactly. For me, he was a non-starter from day one. And, as a never Trumper, I didn't take him seriously when he started off, and he said that he was going to have a ban on Muslims coming to the United States, and then when he made fun of a disabled reporter as the father of a son with disabilities, I found him offensive and an enemy. And then there were windows of opportunity, like on January 6th. I thought, okay, well then, after he lost in 2000, I thought, okay, well this is, or 2020, I thought, oh, well, this is good. People will come home, and they did. They said, well, I was never really with Trump. I was just kind of being strategic because we have to respect the fact that Americans elected him and all that. And January 6th was just awful. It's just awful. And, he just needs to be rejected and all that. And then he slowly crept back in going into 2024. And then you saw a whole bunch of conservatives, Canadian conservatives, going, "Well, he is the president, and he's going on Joe Rogan, and Joe Rogan likes him, and Jordan Peterson says he's a good guy, and he's being really strident and being clear that there's only two genders and the culture war stuff. He's saying a lot of things that I wish we could say, but we can't because of our woke media." And then people got sucked back in. And then now that he's come out with tariffs, now they said, just like January 6th, and say, "Well, I was never a Trumper. I don't like Trump." So when you said this, like, you get my point. And so I've been frustrated as a conservative for a long time in Canada that people have not seen Trump for what he is and the threat that he is to the world, to the Western order, to the North American economic integration and platform, and what it means for peace, prosperity, and stability, and the belligerence and the cruelty in which he has approached this government when it comes to his trading partners and allies. I was just saying to a friend of mine, I've never supported Justin Trudeau. I would never vote for Justin Trudeau. I was a political opponent of Justin Trudeau, but he's not the governor. He's my prime minister.
Yeah,
You don't talk
right.
about him that way.
Yeah.
You don't talk about my country that way. We are a real country. We were there on Juno Beach. We were there after 9/11. Like you go through the whole thing. We were there in Korea. We were there for all the big fights that mattered most, and we've bled for each other. And you don't get to joke and treat us like we're just some fringe county that you're just going to sort of glom on to Alaska. Like, no, piss off.
Yeah,
We've made
And I
this
think a
point on
lot of
this.
Canadians feel that way.
We made this point on this podcast. In fact, Andrew did it, and the most hate mail we've received is actually on this point, because we do get some Trumpers that come and berate our YouTube feed on this. But this the Trump thing seems to be, to me, this is the Achilles heel of this campaign for the Conservatives, because it appears it's still Trump remains the ballot box question, and I think Pierre Poilievre's team was so effective for a better part of almost 3 years of making the case for why change was going to be good, and why even a bit of chaotic change it's what it required. We had to shake the system loose a little bit.
Yeah.
Now Canadians are going, whoa, we don't like it when someone shakes things loose too aggressively, and it seems to me like the Conservatives stand to have a chance to regain some of the shifts in polling if they can find a way to reignite the appetite for change. Is that even possible at this stage? Do you think we're just is the ballot box so cemented at this point that we can't?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, if Donald Trump brings in the tariffs and rocks the Canadian economy, like it's funny because the two issues are sistered together. Pierre did so well, and he was 20 points plus up in the polls because he gelled the ballot question at the time about the economy, cost of living, and the need for change in order to affect the other two. And that's good. But the problem is now the threat to the economy and cost of living is not the Liberals, it's Donald Trump.
Yeah.
So the germ, for lack of a better word, the germ has gone from Justin Trudeau to Donald Trump, been able to play sort of that game of bait and switch. But I think it could boomerang back if Canadians are appeased by the fact that maybe Donald Trump doesn't get as aggressive on tariffs as people think that he might do, or he might give us a bit of a pass on a few commodities, and they might swing back from just being generically anti-Trump to being sort of responsibly trying to mitigate it with a seasoned voice.
The slight pushback I have on the idea that, there was this amazing conservative message of the last few years, which, it was in many ways, and Pierre was obviously a very good communicator on lots of issues. But also, I've always, thought that at the same time, just not being in government at the moment of a global cost of living crisis was probably also the reason for the majority of those 20-point leads, right? Most of those points were made up of simply not being the government. And, you saw that. Look what happened to the Conservatives in the UK, to, established governments across Europe. Whoever was the opposition was pretty easily able to rack up quite big leads in opinion polls and quite big victories just simply by not being the government. Because of this desire for change to address this feeling that everything was going in the wrong direction because of global inflation, cost of living. Well, that change has happened now. So even if the anger with Trump dissipates, I struggle to see where the desire in the electorate for change is going to come from. Because what are you changing from? What, the guy who just represented the change a few weeks ago? So I'm kind of skeptical in my own mind as to whether or not there's the opportunity for the Conservatives to sell this change narrative again, because I think for a lot of Canadians, it's clicked in their head already. We've got the change. It's happened. Yeah. I mean, I might be wrong, but.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, at least is stylistically, Mark Carney is not Justin Trudeau. He's not Pierre Poilievre. He's not Donald Trump.
Yeah.
And so so maybe for a lot of passive voters, they can say that the itch has been scratched of the change question enough with Mark Carney, and maybe now is not the time to go from an incumbent government in the middle of a trade war with the United States to bringing in a whole new government where you have to have all brand new ministers, all brand new chiefs of staff, all new deputy ministers, all new privy council office, a whole new PMO, all the system switchover. Maybe now is not the time, and maybe some continuity is okay, especially because Mark Carney may have, as I said, that rhetorical gap where he's not going to say things that are scary to red Tory voters. And then maybe red Tory voters might say, you know what, maybe the guy who Stephen Harper said could be his finance minister is good enough for me.
I mean, we go from a massive desire for change to a massive desire for stability once you've got change, right? That's potentially where we've gone. But
especially when you face an existential threat like this, I think that it's just like the perfect powder keg is for the Liberals right now.
And it's all true, but there's still a ton of time on the clock, right? I mean, it's a 5-week campaign. Week 1 is done. The debates are still to come. Mark Carney's French is still shaky. And look, the pressure cooker that is an election campaign, getting on a plane a couple, 2, 3 times a day, no sleep, bad food, constantly seeing crowds, everybody gets sick. The pressure of the media, the polls, everybody around you wanting more, the candidates freaking out, like all that pressure. That's something that Pierre Poilievre has lived with for 20 years. Like he is an animal. He knows this world. Whereas Mark Carney in week 1, okay, he had a fine week 1. It wasn't an A plus, but it was a C plus B minus. It was fine. It was good. But talk to me in week 3, week 4, week 5, when everything really hits the road, and he strides out onto the stage for that leaders debate after having crisscrossed the country 5 times, and he's super exhausted and he's not used to this. And there's been a bunch of stories about him that are unfair, and social media is trying to tear down his family and make fun of him, and all the ugly stuff that comes with campaigning. And you've been breathing that in for a month. Then let's see how much of a happy warrior you are at the end of that, right? So by the time the end of this campaign, I think we may have a very, very different picture.
And that's been sort of what I've been sort of hanging my hat on is like, this is the difference between the two front running candidates is Pierre Poilievre is a seasoned campaigner. He knows exactly what he's doing. He's got the stamina for it. I'm not saying Carney doesn't have the stamina for it, but this is his first rodeo doing this kind of thing. And so this is where maybe we start to see a divergent gap. I'm wondering if we could fast forward a little bit and we go to like the eve or the night of the April 28th, or let's say first thing on the 29th. I'm really interested to get your thinking, James, on the different scenarios that could play out and what it means either for the country or what it maybe means for business. But if Pierre Poilievre is able to pull off a win, what do you think his first 100 days look like? And how do you think they might be different than Carney's first 100 days?
That's a good question. I imagine a quick reconvening of Parliament straight away. Pierre is
it would be nice,
an impatient guy.
It hasn't met for so long.
I know,
It would be
what
nice
a concept.
if the elected representatives of the people could actually meet at some point. Anyway, I shall save that rant for later. Again.
No, but I mean, Mark Carney won the Liberal leadership on a Sunday, and he was sworn in on a Friday, and then he started making decisions pretty quickly thereafter. I think actually the timeline will be very similar with Pierre. The one sort of dangling participle over all of it is the speed at which Elections Canada can validate the results in some swing ridings and close ridings where you might have someone who may or may not be a cabinet minister. But yeah, the election will be on a Monday. I can see Pierre naming a cabinet within a week, or broad strokes, and I think Parliament can come back within 2 weeks, and I think you'd have a throne speech and all that. But I do think the turnaround is a big lift. He does have a lot of seasoned and responsible people around him who could put together the transition documents and put together a throne speech and all that. Throne speech doesn't have to be a big, massive, long, tome of a laundry list of things. It could be a very focused effort and all that. But those first couple bills that Pierre is going to have to put forward are going to be big. And then, of course, he has to deal with the White House. He has to deal with provinces and the trade war and all that, and the countervailing issues with regard to the tariff retaliatory stuff. So whoever wins will be drinking from a fire hose real quick. And I think you'll see action really quick right out of the gate, and probably a budget very quickly. And Pierre's going to have to think really hard, because I think what he envisioned as a change budget to deal with austerity and the necessity to get federal spending back under control, things like defunding the CBC and things like that. That may be tomorrow's problem, not today's problem. And he may want to think about that. So you may have a throne speech, you might have some legislation out of the gate, but I also think he's probably going to want to consult with some provinces about what a support package would look like for key industries that are being affected by it. And I think that does require some thinking. And so it's going to be a huge policy spring for sure.
And then, just assuming then the polls are correct, you end up with this, relatively large Carney majority. Where does the threat to him come from? Because you mentioned some of the figures who are, so Carney on the one hand is talking about pipelines, all this kind of stuff the Conservatives have been all over for a few years, but also recruiting star candidates who are, very much associated with climate activism. Gregor Robertson being a prime example out in Vancouver, Fraserview. Where's his biggest challenge coming? How does he manage that then? What do you do? Where do you see the threat coming?
The political benefit of Mark Carney being able to do what I said earlier about having Andrew Weaver and Gregor Robertson, for example, in British Columbia, might be a good thing politically. Governing wise, it's a hard thing. One of my favorite quotes in politics is John Quincy Adams, who said, "Being all things to all people means being nothing to no one."
Right.
And there's the diversity of the weight of the people that Mark Carney is bringing with him into government should he win is so broad and massive that you wonder if he's going to have, if he were to win a big majority, 185 lead anchors around his ankles, such that you might like Mark Carney. You might like what he says. You might like his resume. He might be striking a moderate and contemporary pose on economics. However, he's going to have Andrew Weaver, who's a preservationist green on the West Coast. He'll have still Stephen Guilbeault in province of Quebec, who's saying no to pipelines and pipeline expansions there. He might have Evan Solomon and others in the city of Toronto who will be rookies and wanting a high profile, but he's going to have a lot of pressures. It's like, I remember Paul Martin when he was elected in 2004. He had former Reform Party MP Keith Martin in British Columbia, and he also had Ujjal Dosanjh, the former NDP premier, and he also had sort of libertarian red Tory Scott Bryson in Nova Scotia. Like, how do they all sit around a table and actually have a consensus view on anything significant? And the answer is they didn't. And therefore Paul Martin got the nickname Mr. Dithers, because he couldn't bring everybody along. And Mark Carney, being a rookie politician with a broad, diverse caucus of people of disparate interests, I don't know how you bring them all along. The urgency of Trump is a catalyst, but it doesn't catalyze you in a consistent direction. So what does that look like? So I wonder what that looks like.
If I could draw a parallel, a UK parallel, I suppose that's my job really. You think about what happened in 2019 in the UK, though. We'd won 3 elections, came back with a bigger majority, which is almost against the natural course of things, with a more diverse coalition of Conservative voters and a more diverse caucus, which then just turned into an absolute disaster because we were unable to please anybody, not only our voter base, but within the parliamentary party. And then we crashed out to our worst defeat in, I think, modern history for the Conservative Party, returning with 120 seats, one of our worst showings ever. But maybe that's a lesson for the Liberals if they do manage to keep this coalition together and win big, but also maybe a message of hope for whatever's left on the right way.
Well, I mean,
the next one will be much better.
I mean, my final comment about the campaign is that I still think it's very young. I still think a lot of Canadians are voting for change, and they're hopeful for a new government. Pierre Poilievre has a very high floor. The question is, where is the ceiling? There's all of that. I think is true, but I also think on election night we've had 2 minority parliaments in a row, and I don't think it's going to be a situation where when the results start coming in, we're going to say, Etobicoke Lakeshore is blue, but Etobicoke North is red. Brampton West is blue, but Brampton South is. When the Canadian public makes up their mind, they don't tend to do so subtly. And I think it'll be a brushstroke, and it'll be very clear. And I think Canadians know instinctively that in times like this, we don't want a minority parliament that's going to be, fumbling around and relying on Jagmeet Singh and trying to figure things out and unstable on a sort of a 60-day basis. And no, we need a clear government with a strong prime minister with a clear mandate to stabilize Canada, reconcile our economy, trade to more people in the world, and square off with Donald Trump for the next 4 years. And that requires clarity. And I think the voters will take the very clear measure of Poilievre and Carney, and I think they will vote. And I think whoever wins will have a strong majority.
Awesome. Well, thank you, James. That was incredibly helpful and insightful. I have a bunch more questions for you, but we promise you not to run you too late. So we'll just have to have you back on the show sometime.
Pleasure's mine. It's great to see you both, and congratulations on the podcast, and please keep it going. We need it.